everybody, and welcome to another edition of Decklist Review. I got a ton of awesome positive feedback and some great constructive criticism about my video last week where I did this for the first time, and I wanted to take all of that into account, and thank you guys for watching all that stuff and kind of pushing that along. Some things I'm changing for this one is that, as you can see already, the card view has been increased. I zoomed in so you guys can see the cards better. Links to all of the decks are in the description where I talk about each one individually. And I'm incorporating a new system of discussing these deck lists so I can give you guys a bit more kind of insight instead of like this card is nuts, this card is nuts, so you guys can know sort of why these cards are in these decks. First we want to talk about Ondrej Strasky's Green Devotion, which is really kind of green-red devotion because it has Dragon Lord Tarkir in it, as you see here. But anyway, so what this deck does, it wants to run out early accelerators. It wants to use Sullivan Caryatid, which will excel you from 2 mana to 4 mana. It wants to run Rattleclaw Mystic, which, you know, when you unmorph it, it gives you a mana bonus, and then it's a mana making card from there out. And of course, turn 1, you want Elvish Mystic, so you can kind of get yourself going as soon as possible. Excuse me. So next up, you'll go from Elvish Mystic, ideally, to Courser of Crucifix. He will then be able to get you lands off the top of your deck. Boon Satyr is a great creature to trigger Ferocious. It's a great combat trick. It's great at the end of players' turns after they play a sweeper like End Hostilities or Crux of Fate. And so you can kind of get the beat still going. Polukranos is a fantastic 4-drop. When you're going from 3 to 4 after Courser and Boon Satyr, you're looking at this point at Polukranos, which is great. The Monstrosity ability is fantastic at wiping up the board and making this thing even bigger. And it's just a 4-4, or it's a 4-mana 5-5, which is always fantastic. Surrak the Hunt Caller is the latest addition from Dragons. This card is awesome. It is super easy to hit Formidable in a deck like this. If you go Elvish Mystic into Courser of Crucifix into Surrak, you got it. If you go Boon Satyr into Surrak, you've got it. Like, there's so many different ways. Elvish Mystic into Rattleclaw Mystic into Surrak, you've got it. So, like, there's plenty of ways to get him out there, and Trigger is formidable. And this card also, of course, gives haste to all of these other creatures that you play after him. So there's just sort of value on value, and this guy has the right stats. He kills the Siege Rhino. He kills Tassiger, stuff like that. He's very, very good. Whisperwood Elemental is the last one here. It's a play set. This card is super great. I liked it from the moment I saw it, but I couldn't really tell if it was going to be that good, and turns out it's really that good. And the ability to have a 4-4, which then makes 2/2s at the end of your turn, and then you're sacking it because they're playing In Hostilities or Crux of Fate, so you get all of these cool manifests out of it. That is really, really powerful. And it begins to build up really quickly over the game that it has to be dealt with, or it's going to take over the game. The big breakout card in this deck for this Pro Tour, I would suggest, is See the Unwritten. This is a card from Khans. It got a little bit of hype there at the beginning when it was first released, and then it was like, it just doesn't work. It's just too much mana. There's not enough powerful creatures. Well, now there's enough powerful creatures, because playing See the Unwritten with Ferocious, so you can get 2 creatures, and you get, like, you know, a Dragon Lord of Tarkir and a Polukranos, you're doing fantastic. So that card is super, super powerful to just ramp into these huge monstrous fatties and take over the game. You finally, you're able to use Nykthos with all of your mana producers in order to ramp up to spells like See the Unwritten, Dragon of Tarkir, or huge monstrous activations of Polukranos. So you play this deck because you like to play with awesome beater guys. You like to play with green dorks, like big, powerful monsters who are just going to slam right on the battlefield and get really scary really fast. You're not trying to do a lot of finesse. You're not trying to play this, really intricate, complicated game. You're just going to hit them over the head until they stop moving. That's how this deck works. In the sideboard, you have Nissa Worldwaker, fantastic planeswalker against control strategies who are all about sort of 1-for-1ing you on your dorks and kind of getting removal spells after removal spells. She starts to ramp you into Dragon Lord of Tarkir, of course, if you can go that route, but she also allows you to create 4/4s that just beat over the face and kind of work their way throughout the game to get a force where people just can't keep up. Arbor Colossus is great against other dragon type decks, obviously. It's great against other Dragon Lord of Tarkir decks. Silumgar, which I think people expect to see a lot of play. Voyage Insider kind of pushes you forward. It's 1 more mana accelerator. It's great in the mirror when you're trying to just kind of get out as soon as possible. Xenagos is another planeswalker that is great, both in the mirror to create sort of a lasting form of card advantage and against control. And Nylea's Disciple is against the red decks and the aggressive decks because you need to gain life. So it is good against sort of, these types of decks. They sort of like big creature decks. They just kind of want to go over the top of the mid-range stuff. Yeah, like you have some removal spells and you got some draw spells and some siege rhinos, but I have a huge monstrous 8/8 flying dragon. So they pushed a target to the point where you can't really play a deck now and not think about what happens when they get to resolve it or they get to play it via See the Unwritten, which is fantastic. So I like this deck a lot. It's super cool. Adrian Sullivan's blue-black control. I love Adrian Sullivan. I've known this guy for a long, long time. He's super smart, super good at Magic, and he drives everyone a little bit crazy because he plays his cards upside down, facing you. If we're playing, I will play them facing you, and that it kind of puts people on like off kilter a little bit. And I don't know how much strategy in it versus how much sort of, he's kind of used to doing that for so long now. But Adrian is as Adrian does, and he is fantastic. He's a great deck builder. He's a writer on StarCityGames.com, and he has given us a blue-black control deck that is super powerful. Like all blue-black control really wants to do, and all any control wants to do, they just want to control the game. They want to get to a point where nothing that you do matters. Nothing that your opponent is doing is going to hurt you. Everything has an answer. Everything has, sort of a backup plan. You've got these really huge spells that you're able to build into, and with a deck like this, you kind of start with 4 Bile Blight. You need to have the instant removal. You can't die on the early turns. You have to be able to stop that stuff. You need to counter spells with Dissipate, which has been a fantastic spell since it was printed in Mirage. For Dissolve, obviously from Theros, great card. This is where you're in the early game, you're wanting to counter things, you want to kill things. If you get sort of a hole that opens up there, you want to play Ashiok, Nightmare Weaver, as it is seen here, which is great. And Liliana Vess, who is also, obviously a powerful card on an empty board. You really want to get to a point where you play a sweeper like Crux of Fate, or Drown in Sorrow. If they're playing sort of a ween strategy, you can just destroy them with this card. And then you want to play, a Liliana Vess to go start tutoring what you're looking for. And over time, you want to be able to play Ugin, because Ugin is amazing, and is, even at 8 mana, he hits the board, he gets the job done. Super, super powerful, because late game you're wanting to play Dig Through Time. This is one of the most powerful spells from Dragons of Tarkir, that I got to throw a pie in the face of Brad Nelson over. Yes. And of course you got the Dragon Lord's Prerogative is a new card, which I think is really cool. And you get to this point in the game where you play Dragon Lord's Prerogative, ideally uncounterable if you're playing sort of a mirror strategy or another sort of counterspell deck, or Jace's Ingenuity, because drawing cards is good. Drawing cards instant speed is even better. And when you're using your Bile Blight early in the game, when you're using your Hero's Downfall to kill their big monsters or their important planeswalkers, when you're using Silence the Believers as a late game sort of a card that when you draw it super late and you have 7 mana or you have 10 mana, you can just remove a bunch of really annoying threats that won't be threats any longer. One ultimate price, again, this is just for your cheap removal to try to keep the early game down, and Aether Spouts is a wrecking ball against token strategies. Tokens do not go on top of your deck. If they leave the battlefield for whatever reason, they're just gone. And so if they make a bunch of tokens with Dragon Fodders or Hordling Outburst or Goblin Rabblemaster and they're all smashing in, you're just like, ah. And it's even still good against sort of like those green aggro decks that we talked about a minute ago. When you're smashing in with like 4 or 5 creatures and you Aether Spouts, well, all those creatures go on top. So sure, they're going to get them again, but they have to get them one turn at a time and in whatever order that they sort of decide them to be. So you can also know when certain players do not have any outs left, because if you put 4 creatures on top and you get to a point where even if they draw a creature, it doesn't matter, well then you're in that control role. You are in, I know what's happening, I know what's going to happen, and I know sort of and where the game is going to go. So you play this deck. Those who like control decks, I love control decks, because I like trying to get myself into a position of inevitability. These decks are very good at saying, I'm going to win the game eventually, guaranteed. And this is how it's going to happen. I'm going to counter your spells. I'm going to kill your guys early in the game. And I'm going to probably drop a ridiculous planeswalker that is going to take over the game by itself. Whether it's Ashiok, who gets big early, sort of, again, one of those sort of, if you get an opening early, if you're like, okay, ultimate price your dude, at the end of your turn, play a land, Ashiok, plus it, and with Ashiok plus ability, she goes up to 5 loyalty, or he or she or whatever, goes up to 5 loyalty immediately, and then if you get a good creature out of those, particularly if it's 4 mana or less, next turn you're actually able to put it on the battlefield. So that is a very, very powerful thing to be able to do. Otherwise, all of your lands, you know, like their Dismal Backwater, of course, is just gaining you life, and so is Radiant Fountain, again, gaining you life whenever you play it, and the temples, of course, are scrying you to find you the cards that you want and putting them out of the way when you don't want them. And of course, Herbalist fixing your mana so you can play as much black mana as you would like. Lastly, Perilous Vaults is, again, one of those, you need a board reset. You need to be able to remove all the problems, and this is a card that removes all the problems. This is, you know, it's good against aggressive strategies. It's generally good against mid-range strategies. It depends on the mid-range deck at that point in terms of what its makeup is, what its colors are, and what it has to fight this type of strategy. Control is generally good against most things because you have such very, very powerful spells, and if you play them right, generally, if you use your life as a resource, which means you don't always have to kill everything all the time. You could take some damage in order to let your opponent play some stuff and kind of get out in front of there, and then you're like, okay, great, I'll play Crux of Fate and destroy all of your stuff. You know, this is the deck that for those who really want to take the game and make it go how they want it to go. So in the sideboard, you have Ashiok, who's really great against control strategies, because ultimately, if you can get it down early out of their counter spells, it just kind of keeps plussing and plussing and plussing, and maybe you'll hit a Pearl Lake Ancient, or maybe you'll just be able to ultimate at some point, or you'll hit another creature at that point. Aether Spouts, again, token strategies, just don't want to see it. Neither do they want to see Drown in Sorrow. Pearl Lake Ancient is great against the Mirror because it can be countered, and that's a big thing. And it's also the spell that me and Brad got to pie each other in the face over simultaneously. It's great. You'll see it if you want to watch it in my channel. Anyway, Tasigur is a house. I love Tasigur. I wish it could see more play in this deck per se, but it's really better in sort of mid-range stuff. But Tasigur is great. Again, if you can land it and you have the ability to protect it, it can take over the game by itself. It can begin to get you all your spells back over and over again. It's really one of those mirror breakers, particularly for control. Disdainful Stroke is great against other control decks that are just all about resolving Pelucrinoses and Surocs and Siege Rhinos, you know, some of the big mid-range decks that we saw. Negates, again, great against the mirror. And did I click on it? I clicked on it. Dang it. All right. Anyway, so Negate is great against the mirror, and Thoughtseize is also great against the mirror. Thoughtseize is just a card to answer most of all problems, as it does. Freakish Cure is an anti-aggro card. It both kills a thing and gains you life, and that's very important. Interpret the Signs is just a big draw spell, and if you are in a situation where particularly sort of in the mirror when you're kind of going back and forth and resources and back and forth, and finally you need something to kind of break through, this card can draw you an absolute ton of cards and kind of put you so far ahead that there's not much they can do. Cranial Archive is fantastic, mainly because you know, this is the card that allows you to go super long, you know, go super, super long. This is one of those, like, you know, you're in the control mirrors and they've somehow gotten rid of this and they've somehow gotten rid of that threat. You're like, okay, fine, Cranial Archive, let's shuffle them all in and I'll draw a bunch of cards with all my spells and we'll just do it again. It's for the super, super long game. So really, I'm super proud of Adrian Sullivan. He's been working so hard for so long to have success like this, and I'm glad he's got it. And I wish him luck in the top 8. So Martin, Red Aggro. I love Red Aggro. It's nice. It's straightforward. Now, technically, it's sort of a Tarka aggro. It's red-green aggro. You know, it really only plays the one green spell, as we saw last week in those red aggro decks, where you have a Tarka's command. So how does it work? Well, what do you want to play in this type of deck first is a Foundry Street Denizen. You want to start with that guy. That guy looks really innocuous, but his ability that triggers every time that you have another red creature into the battlefield under your control gets crazy really fast. You not only have the ability to play Dragon Fodder on turn 2, and all of a sudden he's hitting for 3. And then you play Hordeling Outburst on turn 4, and all of a sudden he's hitting for 4, and the other guys are hitting for 2 more. So it adds up really, really quickly. A Frenzy Goblin is cool. It's, you know, it's the ability to get past those Pelucrinoses and those Surocs and those, you know, just big monsters, because you're like, that's a great monster. You have a really cool Siege Rhino, but it can't block. Thanks. That's important. Lightning Berserker, again, another great one drop where you want to start early and then you have the ability to pump all of your mana into it. It's fantastic late game when you draw it because you're just like, fantastic. I'll just dash it and put all my mana into it and hit you and pick it back up. So you can't end hostilities. You can't drown in sorrow. You can't Crux of Fate it. You have to deal with it that way. Our Zergo Bellstriker, again, the closest thing we've gotten to Goblin Guide in a long, long time. Not as good as Goblin Guide, mainly because it's legendary, and the other half, of course, because it doesn't have haste. The fact that you can dash it to give it haste is really cool, but of course you have to put more mana into that. But it is fantastic on turn 1 and really what you want to see. If it's not, a Foundry Street Denizen with enablers like Dragon Fodder and Horde and Outburst, then you probably want Zergo instead. Monastery Swiftspear, another great one drop, another great card that you play and then follow up with Dragon Fodder, follow up with Horde and Outburst, follow up with Wild Slash and a thing and giving it a bonus. You're able to use your tokens to play these great these fantastic burn spells. Of course, these are the best burn spells in the format. Lightning Strike to deal 3 damage. It's Lightning Bolt, but 1 more mana because Lightning Bolt at 1 red is kind of absurd. Force Stoke the Flames, which really takes advantage. Which really takes advantage of all of your token guys because you can make tokens and then you can kind of play this card for free. The tokens don't have to have haste. They don't have to have been around the turn in order for you to use the Convoke ability. It just works immediately, which is great. And the a Targus command, as we discussed, you're probably going to be using it to give your team +1/+1 in reach, along with dealing 3 damage to your opponent. And other times maybe it works. Maybe there's some situations where it's important that they don't gain life, and that happens if they're playing a Jutai's command or some other cards like Seeker of the Way, where that can be important. And Become Immense is at this point, the other green card in the deck, and is just one of those sort of late game. You got a whole bunch of guys on the battlefield. You want to push through that last bit of damage, and +6/+6 is a lot. And it is easy to delve this down to just 1 green mana. So 1 green mana for +6/+6 is no joke. And that card is super, super powerful. So you're in fast, you're in there. You play this deck because you like to be aggressive, aggressive, and you want to go under all of those huge spells. I mean, you saw Adrian Sullivan's deck, and it's all like Ugins and Lilianas and Crux of Fate and all these expensive spells, Perilous Vault, etc. And by the time they play a Perilous Vault, you should be like hitting them like really, really hard. And sure, they have their own removal. They have their Bile Blacks and they have their Heroes Downfalls. But if they don't have the right mana, or if they stumble on their Scry lands, you're the one to make them suffer for it. You have your Goblin Rabble-Masters, which is really just an army in a can. This is great against control because you can just play Goblin Rabble-Master and then just ride him and just hit him and just hit him and make them do something about him. And then you can play another thing, or you can play another threat. This card can just take over the game by itself, and they have to stop it. Goblin Heel Cutter is another great card against the mid-range decks, the Siege Rhino decks, the Surocs, the Pelucranoses, the Arbor Colossus, all those guys, all like the big fatties. This is the guy that says that's a really cool fatty and you can't block it anymore. Hall of Triumph is great against the Mirror. It's great when you need sort of a long game kind of option, at least in my terms of what this could be here for. Scouring Sands is terrific against token strategies because you can wipe away all their tokens and scry 1. It's also good against the Mirror for that same reason because you have your Foundry Street Denizens, you have your Goblin Rabble-Master tokens, you have the Dragon Fodder and the Horde and Outburst. Like it's a pretty good mirror breaker. For Roast, like you need to be able to kill the big fatties, and this is as sort of I mentioned again, Pelucranos, Siege Rhino, you know what I mean? Like they're all very similar because they're all big fatties that you have to be able to deal with, and this is a card that doesn't deal with it very, very well. Destructive Revelry is great against, obviously, enchantments and artifacts and whatnot, but really it kills the Perilous Vaults. It kills the Mastery of the Unseen. That's a big one. Mastery of the Unseen, I don't think did a lot in this Pro Tour, but it had it. At least you got an option to deal with it. It's also great against Courser Crewfix, which is another kind of pain in the butt because not only has it a 4 toughness, it also lets you gain life when they're playing lands. So that's annoying. Eidolon of the Great Revel is a fantastic card in my opinion against the other mono red decks, against the Mirror, because if you get it down early, you kind of start this weird, you kind of start this race of how much damage can I deal to myself in order to deal to them, in order to get their stuff out of the way and kind of sort of get ahead of it. Again, it's good against control decks. It's good. It's okay against mid-range decks because mid-range decks can generally have more early plays and more sort of middle of the game 3 mana to 5 mana stuff to kind of mess with you in ways that control decks don't. It's great against control decks because control decks have so many come in to play tap lands. They have so many spells that they want to play, but they can really only play like one a turn. And if all they're playing is one removal spell a turn, you want to be able to play multiple threats or play a threat like Goblin Rabblemaster, which will continue to put threats on the board and pressure them. There's nothing really new per se beyond, you have your roasts in here, which is really cool. And that card is fantastic. You've got a Targus Command, of course, which kind of made this whole deck kind of work. So sure, there's plenty of new stuff. But in terms of like stuff that we haven't seen in this deck before, we've seen the Targus Command aggro. Become Immense is fantastic and is a great addition, and I expect it to do really, really well in terms of actual usage in the real world. And I can imagine Martin got plenty of good use out of as well. Okay, Jason Chung's Red-Green Dragons. All right, Red-Green Dragons. Here we go. So this is very similar to the Green Devotion deck we looked up at first. You want to start on Elvish Mystic. You want to play turn 2 Goblin Rabblemaster, which is great. All right, so Heir of the Wilds is a 2-mana 2/2 with Death Touch, which is obviously very powerful. It's going to kill anything that blocks it. Rattleclaw Mystic, again, this is sort of how you get your deck running. You want to go from Elvish Mystic into Goblin Rabblemaster, into end of their turn Boon Satyr. You want to get the beats on really, really quickly. You want to play a Morph Rattleclaw Mystic. You want to turn it up, and then you want to play a Surrak the Huntcaller. You want to play a Thunderbreak Regent. These are as good as basically you can get, between Surrak, Thunderbreak Regent, and Stormbreath Dragon are pretty much as good as you can get for 4 to 5 mana in a deck that wants to sort of get there as fast as possible. These are decks that they want to hit hard, they want to hit, but not only do they want to sort of kind of go under things like Mono Red obviously does, but they want to really ramp into things. They want to be able to play these things to ramp into the 4 mana and the 5 mana spells that are going to win them the game, because they know that late game they don't have sort of as many options, obviously, control decks, and the mid-range decks can start to kind of grind them out. These are like the Abzan decks, the Siege Rhinos and the Abzan Charms and things that they can sort of late game start to get so much advantage that they kind of overwhelm you. We have the Draconic Roar to kind of work this into the removal spells. They don't have a lot of removal spells per se. They've got the Draconic Roar, which should obviously have a pretty good chance at giving you not only 3 damage to the creature, but 3 damage to their face, the full Searing Blaze effect via Thunderbreak Regent or Stormbreath Dragon in your hand. Crater's Claws is really great because it's almost always going to have the Ferocious bonus. It's going to have that +2 damage, for free. You have all your mana accelerators, so you can ramp into that. This is a spell that you generally want to put at their face and not at their creatures, because this is a spell that will win you the game. Ultimately, being able to run out, sometimes you run out one, like 2 Crater's Claws in a row, and that's just enough to kill them, because you're just like, 6 damage. I've hit you 8, with 8 damage from my Thunderbreak Regent, and that's the game. Roast, obviously, for the same reason it's in here and sort of almost any other deck, is that there's so many good 5 toughness creatures that you have to be able to kill. Pelucranos and Siege Rhino, obviously, they've really kind of hated out Siege Rhino, and I really appreciate that. The Haven of the Spirit Dragon is a fantastic card. Again, one of these cards that kind of jumped out last week as a awesome late game play to let you continue to kind of get at them. At the end of their turn, you're like, okay, great, I'm going to get back my Thunderbreak Regent, I'm going to get back my Stormbreath Dragon, which I think is sort of the best option, because you want to hit it and you want to get that haste in there and hit them hard. So that's fantastic. Now, Roast is again, great removal spell for red, one of the best they've ever printed. Hornet's Nest is a sweet card that will let you block those big, like, monstrous dudes, like those Arbor Colossuses and Surraks and Pelucnoses and whatnot. They don't really want to attack into this card, so it lets you kind of go over the top with all of your flyers. Destructive Revelry, again, against the Coursers, against the Mastery of the Unseens, against the good enchantments, Whip of Erebos, for example. It's very good against. Wild Slash is against the fast, aggressive decks, the Mono Red Aggros and whatnot. It's pretty good against the Mirror, where you're able to get the advantage and kill their accelerants. They play an Elvish Mystic and you Wild Slash it. They play a Rattleclaw Mystic and you Wild Slash it. Like, you're very much ahead of that point, generally because, you want to play your own accelerants, and if they don't have removal for it, you get ahead of them. Xenagos the Reveler, great against control decks, because it's something that continues to make threats and they have to deal with it before it takes over the game by itself. Arc Lightning is great because it deals with token strategies very well. It's able to hit 1, 2, 3 guys, or it's able to hit, like, kill your Rabblemaster and kill a token or whatever. It's very flexible. Plummet is very straightforward. kills a creature with flying, and it's green. That's important. It kills a Storm Breath Dragon. It kills, you know, the Thunderbreak region that deal you 3. Kills a Tarka, which is a big deal. Kills Silumgar, the Dragon Lord version, of course, not the Drifting Death. But this is a card that's, you know, just when you're playing sort of another dragon deck, you know, and there's so many dragons right now that are so good, it's just kind of a catch-all for anything that flies, which is nice. All right, so to go back here just a little bit, you know, you play this deck again because generally you like to play dragons. You like to play big monsters like Surok and Stormbreath Dragon and Thunderbreak Region, which is really sweet. And it's good against sort of other, it's good against other mid-range decks generally because it's able to go over the top of them. It's good against fast aggressive decks because you're able to stop them very, very early with either your Heir of the Wilds, you have a Roast in there, you've got your Kratos Claws if you absolutely have to, the Draconic Roars are going to hit them, your Elvish Mystics are going to bump off their Foundry Steep Denizens and things of that nature, and then you're going to start playing like huge fatty, and kind of go, you know, sort of from there. It's better against, obviously it gets better against control when you're able to sideboard. Like all matchups get a little bit better because that's what you're supposed to do with your sideboard is you kind of adjust it. And in terms of what's new, I don't think we've seen any real sort of technology being able to put into this deck, but you know, you can definitely tell that it's kind of a well-oiled machine of here's my accelerants, here's my fatty dragon guys, and I'm just going to get you. And I think that's cool. So Shota Yasooka's blue-black control. So I don't want to go over too much of blue-black control. I talked about it with Adrian Sullivan's deck in terms of, you know, how does it work? You have your early removal, which he's using a little bit different removal. He doesn't have 4 Bile Blight, he has 2. He's using Foul Tongue Invocation, which is really cool. The player has to sack a creature, and if you have a dragon, which you probably will, between your Silumgar, both types, the Dragon Lord and the Drifting Death, and your Icefall Regent, which was my spoiler from Dragons. I told you it was good. I told you. But Foul Tongue Invocation is really sweet. You're able to make them sack a dude. Really, really good against mid-range decks. When you kill their accelerant and then you make them sack Pelucranos and you gain 4 life because you have a dragon or you show them a dragon, that is really powerful stuff and really puts you ahead. And you can see how he shaved a few numbers off his removal to get some of that stuff in there. So instead of 4 Heroes Downfall, he has 3, but he has 2 Ultimate Price, which is able to hit things early. He also has a Murderous Cut, which is usually just 1 mana and is super efficient. And there's Silumgar Scorn, which I absolutely adore. I talked about this a little bit in my last Decklist review video, where when this is Counterspell, it just feels just straight unfair. It's very, very powerful. It still hits people for a Force Spike, you know, making them pay 1 or losing it, and sometimes that's good enough. But really, you know, this as a turn 2 counterspell is just absolutely crazy, crazy good and crazy powerful. Early game, you also want to play Thoughtseize to get rid of the best card in their hand, and then you kind of drift into sort of what happens with all blue black is they kind of go into this end game that goes ridiculously over the top. Now, Icefall Regent, you know, locks down their best thing and is able to hit them. You know, it's a 5-turn clock, and Silumgar the Drifting Death destroys all tokens. It's got a huge butt and it cannot lie. But it also has hexproof, so it's really difficult to deal with. Dragon Lord Silumgar is, you know, a fantastic card. It's Solar Temptation, sort of like, you know, super juiced, with a huge butt, and you know, it flies. It's got Death Touch. It's also a Death Touch because Death Touch, you know, right? Because everything has to kill Siege Rhino, and being able to play this and steal their Siege Rhino, play this and steal their Elspeth, you know, play this and still just like their Xenagos, whatever it is. You know, still a Stormbreath Dragon. Like, you're able to put yourself in such a good position by just taking their cards. I mean, you know, sort of, it's as simple as that, really. Ugin the Spirit Dragon, obviously, you know, incredibly powerful. One of, if not the most powerful thing you're able to do in Standard right now. But that's also why it costs 8 mana. So that's a thing. And of course, Haven of the Spirit Dragon is able to get back either of your Dragon Lords and your Icefall Region, all of your creatures, and including Ugin, of course, which is just an incredible late game option, which you should take advantage of every time you can. So the sideboard cards kind of shore up those matchups. Bile Blight, obviously, for the aggressive creature decks. Ultimate Price for the same reason. Disdainful Stroke against the mid-range decks who want to play big 4-mana, 5-mana spells. Stratus Dancer is really great against the Mirror. If you're able to get this thing down early and then you untap with it, you basically have free reign to counter a spell and then have a 2/1 flyer left over, or really a 3/2 flyer left over, rather. And that's a lot of value. And then, of course, you're able to swing in the meantime, and they'll either have to deal with it or figure out a way to run something into it, or like a removal spell to try to stop it. Dragon Lord's Prerogative, obviously a huge control mirror card. When you're able to draw 4 and you have a dragon, or you show them a dragon and it's uncounterable, that is very, very game breaking, really, and can just blow the game wide open. Duress is great against the mirror. Did it show up? It showed up. Okay, there it is. Duress is great against the mirror. Fantastic card to put back in standard, which is fantastic. And let's see, Virulent Plague is as good as it gets in terms of token hate. There has never been token hate to the degree of Virulent Plague, and it shuts down the sort of the Jeskai Ascendancy decks. Just done. They can't do not much. If you're able to kill their Seeker of the Ways, if you're able to kill their Monastery Mentor, because it doesn't really matter if the Mentor makes a token because they're just going to die. Drown in Sorrow, again, against the aggressive decks, against some of the heroic decks, because you want to try to hit them early. But really the token strategies and the Goblin Rabblemaster decks out there are what you want that in there. And of course, Negate is another final anti-control mirror type card, because you want, when you get into those kind of counterspell wars where they're trying to resolve a dig through time and you don't want to let them, you need to be able to have stuff like Stratostancer, like Negate, at the ready to stop them, because with this deck there's not a lot of counterspells. You only have a couple of dissolves, and you have the Silent Scorn, so a really cool package. But with all the dragons, it kind of works. The Silent Scorn, I think, is where we're going to see an absolute ton of play. This card is super, super powerful, and they kind of brought counterspell back as much as they could, and they teamed it up with some amazing dragons in this set, and the fun. And I love Haven. I love how Haven kind of sort of ties it all together. It really ties together like the rug, ties the room together. So. Control decks are generally good against everything in their own way, but you have to play them very carefully, and you have to know how to sideboard, and you have to know sort of where the game is going. Like, where am I at right now? Where do I want to be 2 or 3 turns from now? And if you can sort of figure that out, you generally have a much better chance at succeeding, because unless they get insane draws, you're able to kind of craft the game state where you want it to go. This one runs more Crux of Fate, which is really sort of its Wrath of God effect. It runs more Crux of Fate than it does stuff like Perilous Vault, but that's also because it runs a ton of dragons. Being able to destroy all of their creatures and have an Icefall Regent left over, have your Silent Guards left over, like, that's super, super powerful, and is worth worth running over the Perilous Vaults because of how good it is for you. So I like this deck a lot. I like Shota Yasooka. That guy is crazy good at Magic, and I expect him to do very, very well. This is one that I wouldn't be surprised if he took it down. All right, Marco Cammilluzzi's Abzan control. So we finally get to an Abzan deck. We haven't had one quite yet. Abzan is about that mid-range. It's all about that mid-range, and that generally means it wants to start the game off with removal. It wants to say, I want to Ultimate Price your thing. I want to Bile Blight your thing. I want to Hero's Downfall your thing. I want to Abzan Charm and exile your best creature, your Courser Crewfix that you laid down there, your Pelucranos that you ramped into, and then I want to start playing my own game, which includes I want to play Courser Crewfix to start gaining me life and get me lands off the top of my deck. I want to play Siege Rhino because it's the best freaking thing you can do at 4 mana in Standard, sort of not close. And I want to play Tassiger because late game, when Tasker costs 1 and you're able to get rid of like everything you don't want to get back with Tassiger, but you leave all removal spells or you leave a bunch of cool threats and you activate Tassiger, you have a very good chance of just having what you had left in the graveyard to choose from. And that includes things like Elspeth, which is generally the top end of all of these Abzan decks. Liliana Vest, which again is great against an empty board. You have a lot of removal. You have 4 Heroes Downfalls, you have the Bile Blights, you have the Abzan Charms, you have the Ultimate Price, you have the Utter In, which is a 4 mana just to answer anything. So it's really, I mean, look at those instants. It's just all removal. And then you have one in the form of End Hostilities for sort of the green decks, the aggressive decks that get sort of out of control, and Thoughtseizes to disrupt their early game, to stop their ramping into X. You'll see some of those green mid-range or green-red dragon decks, and they'll play the Elvish Mystic, and they'll play a morphed Rattleclaw Mystic, and they'll be like, oh man, I'm going to get a Tarka in like 2 turns, it's going to be sweet. And then you're like, Thoughtseize away your Tarka, and then they have nothing but a bunch of mana producers, and they can't draw the threat while you are able to draw cards with Abzan Charm and start getting value on Courser Crewfix, and just start using your ridiculously awesome Planeswalkers like Ugin, the sort of the ultimate end game. Liliana Vest to get you to that end game, and is obviously fantastic if you land against a control deck. This card is very hard to deal with for control decks, and making them discard continuously and maybe it'll tutor up whatever you want, takes it over quite quickly. So really, this deck is just basically, disrupt them early, kill all of their stuff, play awesome threats. That's really how it works. It's very simple, A to B. You play this deck because it's good against almost everything in its own way. Sort of like control decks. If you're really good at control decks, you can kind of morph your game about how to accept sort of how to work each matchup. Abzan is just like, it's very straightforward. It's just like, I have so much removal and I have so many options in terms of killing your stuff. I will just exile it and get rid of it. And the sideboard, kind of shores up the matchups with your Bile Blights. You have your Nissa World Wakers for control decks. Your Drowning Sorrows to disrupt your token decks and your early aggro decks like Mono Red. Erase, which is here for Jeskai Ascendancy, because Jeskai Ascendancy is a card. It's obviously hits Courser Crufix and whatnot, and Whip of Erebos, and Farika, cards like that. But it is generally here for Jeskai Ascendancy. In Hostilities, which is great against green decks of almost any type, because they have to have those permanents. They have to play Sylvan Caryatid, Elvish Mystic, Radical Mystic, and they ramp into Surok, Stormbreath Dragon, Dragon Lord of Tarka. This is like, okay, you ramped into like, Arbor Colossus and Pelucranos, and it's like, that's great, kill them. Flea's Mainline, which is generally good against aggressive decks to have an early threat, but you can also work it with the with sideboard games against the mirror, because you're able to monstrosity it, which makes it hexproof and indestructible, and you're able to play a card like in Hostilities, and then basically sort of run away with the game with Fleece Mainlines. So that's very powerful. Duress, again, great against control decks. You want to disrupt them, remove their counter spells, remove their draw spells, remove their planeswalkers. This is a card that does that. And lastly, Read the Bones is a card that's great when you want to get ahead in the mirror and you try to kind of like, when the mirror happens in terms of Abzan, they kind of get into this situation where it's like you're just removal after removal, both of you. You're just, okay, play this thing, all right, kill it. I'm gonna play this thing, all right, kill it. Like, you go back and you go forth and you start getting this weird top deck war. And when you're able to top deck a Read the Bones and scry and draw cards, that will start to put you even further. So between your Abzan Charms drawing you cards and Read the Bones, you can kind of really get a leg up. And as I mentioned, it's sort of good against it's good against green decks, sort of just in general, because it has so much removal. It's good against control decks generally because it has your 4 Thoughtseizes, it has even more Duresses in the sideboard. It's able to land some really powerful planeswalkers that they have a hard time to deal with. The red aggressive decks can generally overwhelm this, but it depends, sort of how you use that removal, and how you use Abzan Charm and what modes are you using with that. What do you feel is worth playing Hero's Downfall on? What do you want to wait for in Hostilities for? Those aren't sort of cut and dry matchups, and that's why this deck is so powerful, because you have a lot of game against a lot of things, and the sideboard allows you to really shore up a lot of those, kind of shifty matchups, or those matchups where you're not 100%. So, all right. Thomas Hendriks Green Devotion. Now, I don't know why this isn't Green Red Devotion, because it certainly looks like it. It's really just a Dragon Lord Tarkir deck. It was, just like one of the first ones we saw here. It's going to try to ramp into the biggest, scariest thing it can. Voyaging Satyr is a card that you see in all these decks as 4-ofs when they really rely on Nykthos. Nykthos is the card that really kind of ties all of these ramp decks together in order of getting lots of green mana symbols on the cards that are on the battlefield, and you want to go into Elvish Mystic, which has 1, Courser Crufix, which has 2, Sylvan Caryatid, and Voyaging Satyr. I mean, look at how much ramp that is. That is a ton of ramp. And then there's Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, which is able to ramp into even bigger creature spells. But when you're able to do that, look at this top end. We have Dragon Lord of Tarka. We have Genesis Hydra. We have Hornet Queen. These are monster spells that, rewards you for having infinite ramp in your deck. So, when your Genesis Hydra is a 6/6 and you're looking at the top 6 and playing something huge, like you're putting a Pelucranos in there, or you're, like sort of channeling a whole bunch of mana into Pelucranos, that's very powerful. Now, Whisperwood Elemental is good, as we mentioned before, to try to sort of keep the game long, and it is an army in a can. It is a card that must be dealt with. It is a card that can provide advantage over time, and, it is really powerful early and is really powerful late. So that's the sign of a great card. Xenagos the Reveler, again, one of the premier cards from from Theros and kind of sort of worked his way in and out of the metagame and is generally always good. Has gotten a lot better here recently, and just making those 2/2s nonstop has been something that has really been relied upon by a lot of decks to get them a long-term advantage. Great against in hostilities, great against Crux of Fate, good against blue-black control if you can kind of sneak it out there. This deck is like you play this deck because you like playing big, huge monster spells. This is like a super Timmy deck. Like, my God, it's running Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, which is a brand new card from Dragons of Tarkir, and you're just playing huge beaters. You're just playing huge dorks. And just like, I'm playing a huge monster. Can you deal with it? Okay, you dealt with it. I'm playing another huge monster. Can you deal with it? Okay, I'm playing this monster. I've got the bees. I've got the Tarkas. I've got the Arbor Colossus, which is just like hanging out. And that thing has 3 mana symbols on it, which is very important for Nykthos. And you're just kind of powering out these huge, huge spells early up and against the game. It is great against other mid-range decks. This is a deck that is kind of built to go over the top of the Siege Rhino type decks, over the top of even the Dragons decks we saw earlier with Thunderbreak Region and Storebreath Dragon. And you're like, okay, that's great, but like Hornet Queen and my Genesis Hydra is huge, and my Atarka is killing all of your stuff. So it kind of goes up and over. It is not great against really aggressive decks, because this is a deck that like it has to get going, and if they can either disrupt that or just kind of ignore that, like, oh, that's a really sweet, Arbor Colossus you got there, or Pelugrinos you got there. I'll just, I'll dash and Heel Cutter. It can't block, and I'll keep getting you. These are the type of decks that, but when they get going, they are unbelievable. And if they don't get going or they don't find their acceleration, they generally just kind of like beat her out, as it were. Sideboard, shores up those matches. You want all of the planeswalkers you can get, between Nissa and Xenagos the Reveler. Against those, of course, you have Ugin the Spirit Dragon, which allows you to ramp into sort of an even bigger, better in-game that you had to start with. Nylea's Disciples, we discussed previously, is good against mono red aggro, a really aggressive decks, because you want to gain a bunch of life. It also has 2 mana symbols in the cost, which is great for Nykthos. Arbor Colossus, which is good against the other dragon decks, against the Stormbreath Dragons, against the Tarkas. It can kill those dragons, and it can leave a huge monster behind, which is important. Reclamation Sage is very good against, oh, come on, man. Bring it up. Reclamation Sage is fantastic against Courser. It's here really, I think, for Mastery of the Unseen type decks, for Jeskai Ascendancy decks. It kills those easily. Hornet's Nest, great against sort of the big green decks. They want to play big, huge fatties and get those going. Seismic Rupture is awesome, as we discussed last week in CVM's deck, because dealing 2 damage to each creature with flying assures that you don't get blown out by Jeskai Ascendancy or Atarka's Command when they have a bunch of 1/1 goblins, for example. This ensures that they all die, kills all the manifest creatures from Mastery of the Unseen, does a lot more work than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And you play this deck because you want to play the big huge fatties, you want to go up and over people, you want to really do cool, impressive things in Magic the Gathering. This is a deck for you. All right, Andrew Ohlschwagers. Oh God, I'm sure I'm butchering that to death. Blue-black control. Andrew's blue-black control. This is sort of another card. This is another deck that is very similar to Shota Yasooka's deck, but it goes in a few different directions. This blue-black control focuses on the early game being of Thoughtseize. I want to disrupt what you're doing as soon as possible. I want to hold up Silumgar's Scorn, and I have a ton of dragons, we'll talk about in a second, and I want to play Anticipate. So, first of all, now that I see Dragon Lord of Jutai, this isn't really blue-black control. This is Esper. Esper is blue-white-black, and this is a blue-white-black deck. If only because it runs Dragon Lord of Jutai, which is very, very powerful. We underestimated it a bit in the set review, but having a 5-mana 5/4 hexproof while it's untapped lets you untap with it and then attack with it and be able to protect it with whatever spells you have. Anyway, so let's go back a bit to the beginning of the game and how this is different. This one runs Anticipate. Anticipate is a great card. It's a sort of Impulse light. Impulse did the same thing, but looked at the top 4. This only looks at the top 3. But that's because Impulse was super, super good, and we didn't really know how good we had it back then, and we can't really print it as it was back then. It also runs 3 Foul Tongue Invocations. You have 8 dragons and that's a ton that you're probably going to have one in your hand when you play that. And the ability to make them sack a dude and gain 4 life is really important against aggressive decks. It's great against the mid-range decks when you can Hero's Downfall, their Accelerator, and then make them Foul Tongue Invocation, their Pelucrinoses or their Surocs or their Arbor Colossus or Storm Breath Dragons or whatever they got over there. It's very powerful. Ultimate price, again, you need early removal so you don't just die. This one doesn't have the Jace's Ingenuities. It has the Anticipates and 1 Dragon Lord's Prerogative, but it does have the Dragons. Icefall Region is a card, again, my spoiler told you it was sweet. It's totally sweet. It's seeing plenty of play in the top 8 of the Pro Tour, and it's able to lock down their best thing and just keep the beats coming. Silumgar is good, whether he's drifting or whether he's the Dragon Lord. He's totally sweet, with or without his Tasigur Decklist. Super, super powerful card that is almost as good as it can get for 6 mana at blue, black, and 4 colorless. Being able to just kill anything that has Death Touch. It's not gonna get ran over by their Tassigurs or their Siege Rhinos. It's going to be able to block everything. It's going to be able to take something really great from them. And of course, at the very, very tip top, you have your Ugin the Spirit Dragon in terms of the biggest, baddest threat that you can throw out on the battlefield. In the meantime, you have 1 Sign in Blood, which I think is really interesting, because not a lot of people run this card, but I guess you really need card draw, and card draw is very important, and you have plenty of removal if you can get to it, and being able to kind of power through the early to mid game where you use a lot of your spells and you use a lot of your sort of resources into not dying. You want to kind of accelerate onward into the end game, and this helps you do that. Now, 2 Crux of Fate, again, with all of these dragons, it's sort of a one-way Wrath of God, and again, it's the best against a green deck or a green base deck where they have a bunch of huge dudes who are almost all guaranteed to die when you play this spell. So another sort of a different sort of take. Again, I feel like this is an Esper deck. It's not a blue-black control deck. And Dragon Lord Azutai is a great addition. It has some really, really powerful spells, and I like the build of it quite a bit. For the sideboard, you can go up to a full 4 Foul Tongue Invocations. The card is unbelievably sweet when you have a dragon in play or in your hand, and that's important. Thoughtseize is here. Again, just kind of when you want to disrupt something as early as possible. This is like Jeskai Ascendancy combo. This is other control decks when you want to stop their sort of their game plan from going. It's not bad against or it's not, I guess, at its worst against sort of the mid-range decks to stop their acceleration early or to get their big threat out of the way early. Jurabai Murklurker, which always kind of cracks me up. It's just a big wall. It's a big wall for mono red aggro and for other aggressive decks to kind of get through, because once you kind of play out this 3 mana 2/4, you play a black and a colorless, and you can give any creature lifelink, including itself or any other dragon that you have. So if you give your Icefall Region, lifelink, okay, sweet, 4 in the air, and they take it, and you gain 4, and that can kind of pull you ahead in those aggressive matchups and the matchups that run lightning strikes and draconic roars and things of that nature, because it's really hard to get around. Bile-Blight, targeted removal. Targeted removal is targeted removal. It's good against token decks because it kills all the tokens, and it's good against the sort of green aggressive decks because you kill their early drops. Negate is good against the mirror, of course, because you're able to stop what they're trying to do, because you have to win those counter wars. When they Silumgar Scorn your Dragon Lord Azutai or your Dragon Lord Silumgar, you've got to be able to negate that and then be able to have something else like your own Silumgar Scorn when they try to dissipate it or what have you. Virulent Plague, as we discussed, was the best token hoser ever made, and it just wrecks them real bad. Perilous Vault is good against the really slow decks. It's good against the mirror in terms of getting rid of all their planeswalkers off the top of your deck. You're like, oh great, I drew a Perilous Vault. Let's get rid of everything because the game has gone super long as they do. It's generally better. It's also good against the mid-range decks because again they kind of ramp into things, and you'll either have the removal or you'll be able to let them kind of expand out their game, and you play a Perilous Vault, and now they've got all these accelerators. But if they play a huge monster, you're able to get rid of the Perilous Vault. So then they have to kind of figure out what threats they want to commit. And in the meantime, you're able to draw cards and set up your hand and set up your end game, which is what you're ultimately trying to do. Drone and Sorrow, again, great against the mono red aggro decks, the token-based strategies. You know, it just kills all the things that are small. Stratus Dance are good in the mirror because not only will you be able to counter one of their powerful spells, such as a draw spell of Jace's Ingenuity or a Crux of Fate or what have you, and you're able to have a 3/2 flyer left over. Like, you know, obviously it's best in those counter wars, as I told you about earlier, you know, when they're Silent Scorning or dissipating something and you're able to turn Stratus Dancer over and have a 3/2 flyer left over, that's a clock, as we know from Delver of Secrets. Ashiok Nightmare Weaver, again, great against control decks early. You want to land this card before they're able to stop you, and sort of, you know, let it kind of take over the game from there. And lastly, Hero's Downfall. It's good removal. It's good against Planeswalker decks. It's good against decks where you just, again, you know, like, you're afraid that they're going to play one too many threats that you can't deal with. And Hero's Downfall obviously is the catch-all for all the things. All right, so that is the end of our top 8 Pro Tour deck lists. Pro Tour Dragons of Tarkir is coming to a head, and I'm really excited to see who's going to be able to take it down. I think there's some really cool decks here, and, you know, ultimately I hope that the way that I kind of adjusted the way I talk about decks this time was better than last time. And I, of course, want any and all feedback. If you guys you know, watched all this, I really appreciate it. I mean, you know, like, it's not a short video, but again, you guys want the content. I like to make it for you guys. I like talking about Magic. These decks are really cool. They're brand new. They went through a field of the best, and we will see who ends up the best at the end of Pro Tour Dragons of Tarkir. So thank you guys very much for watching. Thanks a lot to the Patreon supporters. You know, you guys are awesome. And until next time, Magic players, this is Evan Irwin, tapping the cards so you don't have to.
I always like the fatties.